Right, I think I'm the last speaker, so I'll try and get through my slides reasonably quickly because I think we're quite a bit over time. Firstly, thank you very much for the invitation. I actually did not know that this club existed, and this is amazing. I'm really glad to see that there's a group of people at UQ who share this interest. It's awesome. I thought I'd start off by telling you a little bit about myself. So I did my PhD at the Queensland Brain Institute, working in a lab that looked at genetic and molecular mechanisms underlying learning and memory. So my PhD project basically looked at a kind of genomic dark matter called non-coding RNA. Basically, it's the functional molecules that are produced by what we used to call junk DNA. But coming of age scientifically in a neuroscience institute does mean that you develop a lot of interests outside your immediate field of study. And a few of mine are neuroethics related. So some of the ethically interesting ideas that I was exposed to include psychedelic assisted therapy, the possibility of reconstructing thoughts or mental states from neuroimaging or other external methods of measuring brain activity. And also I did a lot of work with both neuronal tissue culture and animal models, and I did have to think quite seriously about the ethical implications of some of that too. So I got my PhD in 2021 and I've moved on from neuroscience now. I work as a postdoctoral researcher at the Australian Institute for Bioengineering and Nanotechnology. And my current project focuses on development of mRNA-based therapeutics, mostly for cancer. And I'm very lucky to get to work on something so potentially impactful. And that brings me to the next thing that I want to talk about. So I'm also here representing Effective Altruism UQ, and Miles has just given a very compelling introduction about what EA is, but I'll talk a little more about what it means to me. So I'm an effective altruist, but I'm also a molecular biologist. And I'm of the opinion that the EA community, for all of the many things that it gets right, does kind of systematically underestimate the opportunities for impact in life sciences research. And since there's loads of people in this room with an interest in life sciences and neurotechnology, I'd really love to make that case to you too, because I think that this is a really important and impactful area of research. And so one of the simplest ways to describe effective altruism is doing good better. And there are obviously three parts to this statement, and the first one is doing. So some of the actions that effective altruists like to take include donating money to charities or causes that we have reason to believe can make especially effective use of it, changing our own consumption and habits, volunteering for a variety of causes, and also using our careers to try to do good in the world. Most people obviously will spend more time at work than they could ever possibly spend volunteering. And so looking for a way to benefit the world with my working hours is something that really speaks to me. The next part is good. Now, one of the things that I like the most about this movement is the intellectual freedom. People decide for themselves what good means. Mostly we care about reducing suffering and increasing well-being for all sentient beings, including those very different from us. So another thing I really like about the community is that people are willing to take ideas seriously, even if they seem superficially weird. So, for instance, considering the welfare of farmed shrimp, as well as the welfare of farmed cows and pigs. A lot of us are also interested in existential risks, which are low probability events that could destroy humanity if they ever happened. So things like nuclear wars, supervolcanoes, and catastrophic climate change. And I picked these examples because I think they kind of intuitively illustrate the value of using the language of probability and statistics when determining whether or not we're missing something important. But for the sake of this talk, I'm going to assume that the kind of utopia that Miles was describing is roughly what we mean by good. And the last bit is better, which to me means looking for opportunities to have an outsized positive impact on the world. It means deciding how to allocate our resources in ways that will get humanity the most bang for our buck. So here's a simple framework that the EA community finds helpful for determining what's likely to have the most positive impact in the absence of firm data. Number one, importance. How many people or sentient beings are affected by this problem now? How many might be in the future? What are the worst possible outcomes if this problem is not solved, and what are the best possible outcomes if it is? Number two, neglectedness. How many people or organizations are working on this problem right now, and could they make good use of additional resources? Would adding more resources to this be a massive boost, or would it run into a diminishing returns or too many cooks kind of situation? Number three, tractability. This basically means how solvable is this problem? is effort, time, and resources spent on this actually going to move the needle? There are some really important problems that we have to leave in the too hard basket for now because we don't have the technology or the sheer amount of resources that would be needed to make meaningful progress. So what causes do most EAs consider to be effective or important within this framework? Well, I want to mention again that there are some really big differences of opinion about this, which is awesome. But in the interest of keeping this part of my talk short, here are some of the causes which are most commonly associated with effective altruism. They include extreme poverty, neglected tropical diseases, factory farming of animals, biosecurity and pandemic prevention, prevention of nuclear wars, and working to make sure that future artificial intelligence is aligned with human values and goals. That's a pretty big diversity of important causes with lots of stuff that is fundamentally about biology. And yet, when I was a grad student attending student-focused career events, these are the career suggestions that I was hearing over and over. And I think that from lists of suggestions like these, you can kind of see the history of the movement, which, if I'm really honest, is a bunch of Silicon Valley tech bros trying to figure out how best to donate the obscene amount of money that they suddenly found themselves with, and then invest the proceeds of their entrepreneurship into doing good. Historically, relatively few EAs have had the knowledge or the background knowledge, the qualifications in disciplines like biology, molecular biology, to deeply incorporate ideas like this about how to do life sciences research effectively into the culture of our organization. And that means that there's kind of a gap in the kinds of careers that bright young people, like everyone in this room, are being suggested to pursue. But we also know that personal fit matters when it comes to effective career decisions. Given a choice, I think it's important to do something that benefits the world and also that I like and am good at. And I want that for everyone else too. I like to think that I'm a pretty decent scientist, but I don't have the math or abstract reasoning skills to thrive in a discipline like AI technical research. What I do have is an abundance of curiosity about the natural world and an intuition for understanding biological complexity. And I know I'm not alone in that, and so I increasingly find myself an evangelist for effectiveness in life sciences. I felt for a long time like my career ambitions weren't or couldn't be an EA thing because I didn't see my interests and skill set represented in the community. So now I'm trying to make the effort to share my thoughts and experiences in this space to build community awareness of how many opportunities for impact exist within life sciences. And because this is a neurotech audience, I've picked out two topics that I think might relate to the research or ethical interests of some of the people in this room, and where I think that there might be opportunities to have an outsized impact. So the first of these is hedonistic set point. This is basically the idea, backed by quite a bit of evidence, that most people have a fundamental set point for happiness and contentment when they are mentally well. So just to be clear, I'm not talking about people with mood disorders like depression or bipolar disorder. I'm talking about people with no diagnosis. You know how some people just seem to go through life being just like kind of about everything all the time? And then other people seem to find just a kind of quiet joy in life almost all of the time. That's hedonistic set point. Now, obviously, everyone has both positive and negative events that happen in their life. Someone going through something awful like bereavement or a breakup or financial woes is probably going to feel crappy a lot of the time. And someone experiencing new relationship energy or achieving a major personal goal or going on an awesome holiday somewhere really nice is probably going to feel great. But over time, people's average daily mood returns to its baseline point. And that baseline can be quite different for different people. But research shows that long-term happiness is stable over time for most people. And in my opinion, that's really freaking unfair. Again, notice that these three people are all close to the middle of the scale. So none of them would be considered mentally unwell at all. These people are all variations on normal. But I would bet that over a lifetime, person C is going to have subjectively higher welfare than the others. Now, obviously, we have interventions that can temporarily bump someone all the way up the happiness scale, but equally obviously, these aren't good things. We've already had several conversations tonight about these. A lot of really great fiction has been written about the risks and dangers, both personal and societal, of drug abuse and wireheading and other possible ways to exist in a state of artificial bliss. And I think there's a general consensus that this is not something that we want or should be working towards. But what if we had interventions that could shift a person's set point just a little bit in a positive direction? Nothing that would make them neglect their responsibilities or behave self-destructively, but something that would make sunsets just a little more colourful, and a hot cup of tea on a rainy day just a little bit more warming. To have any hope of achieving this, there's obviously a great deal of research to be done about why there is a difference between individuals and hedonistic set point. And we also need a robust ethical debate about what kind of interventions are acceptable and what should be encouraged versus permitted versus required versus like banned. To be clear, this technology does not exist, and I know that I'm being vague and kind of futuristic, but this stuff makes me think, and I love to share that. And I think there's other questions there like, how far up the scale can we go before it turns into drug abuse and wireheading? What do we do with the people who opt out? There's so many hairy ethical questions. I absolutely love this kind of thing. So the final part of my talk, I wanted to touch on a topic we've already heard about tonight from Phaedra, so I'll skip over some of the intro because she's already done such a great job of explaining what organoids actually are. I'm used to having to introduce this whole concept from scratch, so I can skip over so much stuff. When I was a PhD student, I used to grow neurons in single layers in dishes, and to be honest, I put this up. I just wanted to have an excuse to put this image on a slide. It's probably my favorite scientific image that I've ever taken. Oh, thank you. So these cultures are made from all kinds of adult neurons just jumbled in together without the supporting cell types of the intact brain. They do form connections with each other. Electrical currents can be observed and measured in the dish, but these neuron cultures are absolutely nothing like brains. And then in the last few years, obviously, this new form of neuronal tissue culture has taken off. And when cultured in a special way that Phaedra was telling us about, these neuronal stem cells can recapitulate some of the developmental events that happen in the embryonic brain in order to self-organize into complicated networks of dozens of cell types. And this beautiful layered morphology is the same kind of complex cellular architecture that supports consciousness in humans and animals. And doing research with humans or vertebrate animals obviously comes with pretty extensive ethical and regulatory oversight. I spend an insane amount of my life dealing with animal ethics related paperwork. But no one cares what I do with bacteria or fruit flies because of the general consensus that they cannot suffer to a meaningful degree. And this is also true of monolayer tissue cultures. And I think even a decade ago, the idea that something resembling consciousness could ever come about in a laboratory incubator was so far-fetched, it was a matter of sci-fi. And now it could actually become reality, and the ethical framework for these tissue culture experiments really hasn't caught up. So the primary ethical concern at the moment is, can they suffer? And this one I'll skip over a bit because we've already heard about it tonight. So obviously some people have argued that they can't because they don't have sensory inputs, but they do have most of the cell types that process sensory information. And one thing we know about brains is that they're incredibly plastic. So when their expected input is missing, they can find a new one to respond to, which is part of the reason why amputees can sometimes experience sensation in phantom limbs that they don't have anymore, because of pain and sensory circuitry responding to incorrect inputs. And we don't really know what inputs organoids are responding to or can respond to, but we know that their electrical patterns can change in response to light and movement. Another question is whether research on organoids is more or less ethical than research on animals. So we've already heard a lot about the ethical case for replacing laboratory animals with tissue cultures, which has always been considered, in my experience, to be straightforwardly ethically good. But when we work with animals, they can tell us through their behavior when they're suffering, and then we can take action to relieve their distress. Not so for an organoid, which has no capability for a behavioral output, which could theoretically scream into the dark without anyone hearing. So to be clear, I do believe that at least with current technology, replacing animals with organoids is a good thing. But as this technology improves, I don't think we can always assume that all organoids will deserve less ethical consideration than animals do. A third question is whether or not it's acceptable to implant cerebral organoids into the brains of animals. So the size and complexity of these structures is currently limited by gas and nutrient exchange in tissue that lacks a circulatory system. But when you put these organoids into animal brains, they very quickly tap into the animal's circulation and continue to grow. And we don't know whether they would continue to expand their own potential consciousness with access to the animal's metabolism. Another possibility is that the interface between an organoid and animal could result in the organoid accessing the animal's senses, causing profound changes to either the organoid's or the animal's perception of the world. And then the final ethical question that stands out to me is, what do we do with these things when the experiment's over? I don't think twice about throwing a dish of cultured cells into the bin, but killing a mouse always feels like an act of some gravity, you know, something that is deserving of reflection and respect. And I don't know where on the spectrum we can say that these things fall. I think, do we have an obligation to destroy them when they reach a certain age, or is it more like an obligation to try to keep them alive? And I think whether we're ready for it or not, this technology is already becoming less Brave New World and more lab next door. And I completely agree with Phaedra that there are major ethical quandaries here that we are only just beginning to grapple with as a society. So these are just two examples among many, 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 many emerging technologies that we've heard about tonight that have potentially profound impacts on the future of humanity and society. And it's really wonderful, actually, to see so many people here tonight who are interested in neurotechnology and transhumanism. And if you see a future career in this area, and you'll remember one thing from my talk tonight, I hope it will be this one: it matters how much good you do. There are many opportunities for impact in life sciences, both in research and in grappling with the legal and ethical and policy ramifications of that research. And I really hope that a few of you will find them. Thank you.